Are you about to watch a documentary filled with banned films, true crime, psychological horror, and enough human depravity to make your television quietly reconsider its career choices? Then you need the Pizzaverse Disturbing Movie Survival Kit. Each kit comes professionally packed with everything required to descend into cinema's darkest basement without completely losing your damn mind. First, you receive one industrial-strength blanket. Not for warmth. For pulling over your face when the documentary reaches a scene your curiosity insisted on seeing, but your nervous system immediately files an objection to. Next, we include a family-sized supply of snacks. Because nothing says serious historical analysis like eating cookies while somebody explains why a movie was banned in 17 countries. You will also receive our patented emergency eye covering hand. Simply raise your own hand, place it over your eyes, and continue peeking through your fingers like a responsible adult. Every kit includes one flashlight, 3 locked doors, and a handwritten reminder that the strange noise upstairs was probably the house settling. Probably. Upgrade to the Deluxe package and receive the official Pizzaverse Emotional Support Pepsi, designed to restore courage, dignity, and approximately 14% of your faith in humanity. The Deluxe package also includes our exclusive "Why Did I Watch That?" recovery card. Simply read it aloud after the video. I was conducting research. Repeat until your family stops judging you. Order within the next 10 minutes and we will include a complimentary movie night warning sign reading. Do not enter. Bad decisions are currently being documented. The Pizzaverse Disturbing Movie Survival Kit. Because curiosity may have killed the cat, but apparently it also rented the director's cut. Available nowhere. Approved by nobody. And absolutely useless once the lights go out. Now grab your blanket, check the locks, and prepare to descend. The movie Iceberg is waiting.
Disclaimer. The following video contains discussion and footage involving disturbing films, true crime, violence, psychological abuse, murder, and enough human depravity to make your streaming recommendations file for protective custody. This program is presented for educational, historical, analytical, and entertainment purposes only. It does not glorify violence, excuse criminal behavior, or recommend reenacting anything you're about to see. Seriously, do not get ideas. Society already has enough problems. Any film clips, photographs, and archival materials are included for commentary, criticism, and analysis. All rights remain with their respective owners. Some stories discussed were inspired by real crimes, while others were dramatized, sensationalized, or fed through the movie industry's patented historical meat grinder. Where facts are disputed, they will be treated as disputed, not magically promoted to truth because somebody added ominous music. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is not family movie night, unless your family is deeply unusual.
The disturbing movie Iceberg. True crime, banned films, and cinema's darkest depths. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written and produced by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent Vinny DiPrio. There are disturbing movies, and then there are movies that make you stare at the closing credits, wondering whether humanity should be allowed to continue unsupervised. Today, we are descending into the disturbing movie Iceberg. At the surface are the titles most people recognize. The infamous films, the prestige crime dramas, and the stories everybody claims they watched without looking away. But beneath them waits something darker. Obscure international productions, movies inspired by real murders, films banned, censored, misunderstood, or quietly passed around by audiences who apparently believed a peaceful night's sleep was overrated. Our first stop is The Untold Story, a brutal Hong Kong crime film connected to the horrifying 8 Immortals restaurant murders. And believe me, the title is the gentlest thing about it. From there, we continue downward through cinema's locked basement, examining the crimes, controversies, legends, and uncomfortable realities behind some of the most disturbing films ever made. So lock the doors, lower the lights, and keep the snacks where you can see them. Welcome to the Iceberg. Let's start digging.
Missing people in Nome than any other town in Alaska.
We tell ourselves stories to feel safe. We put evil on a screen, trap it in a 2-hour runtime, and call it entertainment. But strip away the studio lighting and the fake blood, and you aren't watching fiction anymore. You are looking at a crime scene. Today, we are looking into the most disturbing movies based on terrifying real events. Let's begin. So you've probably eaten at a restaurant before without thinking twice about who's running the kitchen. But after hearing this next one, you might start asking questions. In the Portuguese colony of Macau, a Chinese gambler named Huang Jiheng became tied to one of the territory's most chilling criminal cases at the 8 Immortals restaurant. 10 people, an entire family and their relative, vanished in a single night. The motive was a gambling debt of 600,000 patakas, roughly $75,000 at the time. That's about $230,000 in today's money. Over cards, over mahjong. And nobody even noticed they were gone for over a year. The 8 Immortals restaurant was a modest Chinese dining establishment connected to the 8 Immortals Hotel in the Yao Hon district of Macau. It was owned by Zheng Lin, a former street vendor who had worked his way up from selling food at roadside stalls in the 1960s. Classic immigrant success story. The guy started with nothing, built a legitimate business, and raised his entire family nearby to help run the place. The business did well, but Zheng and his wife had one major weakness. They were serious gamblers. Huang Jiheng was born in mainland China as Chen Ziliang before moving to Hong Kong in the 1970s. In 1973, he was linked to a serious incident involving a man over a debt at his victim's home in Quarry Bay. When the heat came down, he fled to Guangzhou, changed his appearance, and tried to erase the trail investigators might follow. After living in Guangzhou for several years, Huang married his landlord's daughter. When her family objected, the couple eloped to Macau. He changed his name, laid low, and started frequenting the local gambling scene. That's where he crossed paths with the Zheng family. During an evening of gambling in 1984, Huang and Zheng got into a series of high-stakes bets. When the smoke cleared, Huang had won 180,000 patakas from Zheng and his wife, roughly $20,000. The Zhengs couldn't pay. They made a verbal agreement. If the debt wasn't repaid within 1 year, the Zheng family would hand over their restaurant's mortgage to Huang. A year passed, no payment. And according to Huang, not only did they fail to repay him, they kept gambling and losing, allegedly racking up a total of 600,000 patakas. Now look, I'm not defending what happened next, but you have to understand, in Huang's twisted mind, he felt owed, he felt cheated. And on the night of August 4th, 1985, he decided to collect. 9 members of the Zheng family were cleaning up after closing the establishment when Huang entered and demanded partial payment of the debt. They refused. Huang grew increasingly agitated when Zheng Lin refused to turn over ownership of the restaurant as promised. What followed was 8 hours of nightmare-level cruelty that I genuinely cannot describe in detail. Huang took the family's son as leverage and forced the other family members to restrain each other. He then attacked all 9 people, plus an additional relative he lured inside afterwards. 10 lives were taken total. He concealed the evidence, wrapped what remained in trash bags, and disposed of it in the ocean and dumpsters. Then he cleaned the restaurant, recovered money and a safe key from the scene, and spent the night at the family's nearby residence. 3 days later, Huang reopened the 8 Immortals restaurant and managed it himself. To anyone who asked about the Zheng family, he said they'd gone back to mainland China for a trip. People believed him. After all, he knew the family. He had documents. The food was still good. For over a year, nobody questioned it. The first clue came when a swimmer at Haksar Beach made a deeply unsettling discovery. Remains washed ashore, including 4 right hands. Police initially suspected shark attacks or smuggler violence. The next week, more evidence washed up and drew police interest. Meanwhile, relatives of the Jung family filed a missing persons report. The pieces started connecting. Police realized the findings matched the timeline of the family's disappearance, and their attention turned to the restaurant's new owner. When police searched Huang's assets, they discovered documents belonging to Jung Lin, as well as student ID cards for the family's children. Game over. On September 28, 1986, Huang tried to flee Macau for the mainland but was stopped by police. He claimed he was just escorting his wife and children home. The evidence said otherwise. After being charged, Huang was taken into custody, where he faced hostility by other inmates. He made several attempts to harm himself but was saved each time. On October 6, 1986, he finally confessed in full detail. The 50-year-old man was charged with 10 counts of the most serious offense imaginable. He would later die in prison, and police subsequently closed the case. The last evidence connected to this case wasn't discovered until 1989, 4 years after the incident, found in scattered garbage. Now here's where fact bleeds into fiction. The claim that Huang continued operating the restaurant for months after the incident created an urban myth that he had served unthinkable ingredients in the establishment's famous pork buns. This case is sometimes referred to as the pork bun crimes, due to dark speculation that some of the missing evidence was served in the restaurant's signature char siu bao. Was this actually true? While the family's disappearance did occur at the restaurant, the alleged taboo rumor is sensationalism, inferred from the incomplete discovery of remains and the lack of decomposition smell despite the tropical summer heat. In other words, probably not. But probably not doesn't make for good campfire stories, and it definitely makes for good Hong Kong exploitation cinema. 8 years after the incident, Hong Kong director Herman Yao decided this was the perfect subject matter for a movie. The Untold Story is a 1993 Hong Kong dark crime film directed by Herman Yao and starring Danny Lee and Anthony Wong. The literal Chinese title translates to 8 Immortals Restaurant, Human Meat Roast Pork Buns. In Hong Kong, due to its explicit and disturbing content, the film was awarded a Category 3 rating, the equivalent of NC-17 in the United States. Category 3 films are essentially Hong Kong's way of saying, adults only, and even then, maybe reconsider. They're notorious for pushing boundaries. The Untold Story is not just the greatest Category 3 film ever made, but also one of the best of any kind to have come from Hong Kong. High praise for a movie about a chef with a pitch-black secret. The film is held together by Anthony Wong's stunning performance, for which he was awarded the Best Actor accolade at the 1993 Hong Kong Film Awards. There's even a point near the end where his performance almost leads you to having sympathy for him as the police pressure him into a confession. Then you remember what he did. One of the weirdest things about The Untold Story is its bizarre mix of bleak horror and slapstick comedy. Half the film follows Danny Lee and his gang of bumbling Macau detectives as they trip, fumble, and blunder through the investigation. It's like Keystone Cops if the Keystone Cops were investigating something no comedy should ever be standing next to. Rumor has it that Danny Lee, who genuinely believes he's a cop since he's played them in hundreds of movies, was worried about disgracing the Hong Kong police force. The director convinced him it was okay because they were depicting Macau's police as incompetent, not Hong Kong's. Despite its restrictive Category 3 rating, the film managed to become a box office hit. It proved that audiences would show up for dark, boundary-pushing cinema if the craft were there. Anthony Wong's career exploded afterwards, and he went on to appear in everything from John Woo action films to Hollywood productions like The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Today, the former restaurant location is part of Baxian Hotel. You can actually visit the site if you're in Macau, though I'm not sure why you'd want to. The food probably isn't even that good anymore. Is that weird? Probably. Does it say something uncomfortable about us as viewers? Definitely. Am I still recommending you watch it? Maybe after a large meal, so you don't get hungry during the restaurant scenes. This next story asks what happens when an entire community sees a dangerous man as helpful, protective, even necessary. Because evil does not always arrive looking like a monster. Sometimes it fixes your car, watches your kids, and tells you he is keeping the neighborhood safe. Snowtown is a 2011 Australian film so unflinching, so brutally honest, that one prominent TV critic gave it 0 stars and declared, "This is as close to a snuff movie as I ever want to see. I've seen it so you don't have to." But he was wrong about that last part, because understanding what happened in South Australia between 1992 and 1999 might be one of the most important cautionary tales about manipulation, poverty, and how ordinary communities can hide extraordinary evil. The movie Snowtown, directed by Justin Kurzel in his feature debut, tells the story of one of the darkest crime sprees in Australian history. And unlike most films in this genre, it doesn't give you the satisfaction of a clear beginning, middle, or end. It drops you straight into the shadows of working-class Adelaide and makes you live there. The film centers on Jamie Vlasakis, a vulnerable 16-year-old living in Adelaide's struggling northern suburbs with his mother and brothers. Jamie's life is already deeply damaged before John Bunting enters. He comes from an unstable home with a history of trauma and has no reliable father figure. So when Bunting arrives, full of confidence and protective energy, Jamie sees something he's never had, someone who actually seems to care. And that's exactly how Bunting was in real life. He fixed cars, he watched people's kids, he organized neighborhood watch meetings. One resident who lived near him during filming recalled stories of Bunting helping the community a decade after his arrest. Director Justin Kurzel grew up in Gawler, not far from where these events took place. When he read the script by Sean Grant, he wasn't interested in making a typical crime thriller. In interviews, he explained that he wanted to capture the banality and ordinariness of the world where this awful thing happened. He didn't want to romanticize it. He didn't want dramatic music telling you when to feel scared. He wanted you to sit in the discomfort. The casting alone sets Snowtown apart from almost every other film in this category. Aside from Daniel Henshaw, who plays Bunting, and a few other professionals, almost everyone in the movie was a local resident with zero acting experience. Kurzel literally found them in the neighborhoods where the real events occurred. Most of them lived in Devoran Park. You might think untrained actors would feel amateurish. Instead, it feels like you're watching a documentary. The authenticity is so overwhelming that multiple reviewers described feeling physically unwell during screenings. Between August 1992 and May 1999, John Justin Bunting, along with accomplices Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis, preyed on 11 people across South Australia. A fourth man, Mark Hayden, helped hide evidence. The targets weren't strangers. Almost every single person Bunting chose was someone he already knew: neighbors, friends, even family members of his accomplices. His claimed motivation was that he told those around him that he was cleaning up the community, people he labeled as predators, substance users, or simply weak. He held neighborhood meetings where he and his circle would discuss who in the community deserved punishment. They'd point fingers at people on welfare, people with disabilities, anyone Bunting deemed worthy of his twisted moral judgment. But that ideology was mostly a cover. In reality, investigators discovered that Bunting and his crew selected people specifically to steal their welfare payments. After someone disappeared, the group would continue collecting their benefits, sometimes for months. One victim's pension was claimed for over $17,000 before authorities caught on. So while Bunting preached vigilante justice at kitchen table meetings, he was really just running a grim financial scheme. It's almost impressive how thoroughly evil you have to be to somehow make the situation worse by adding financial fraud to the list. The discovery on May 20th, 1999, shocked Australia. Police had been quietly investigating a series of missing persons cases for over a year. Following leads about Elizabeth Hayden, Mark Hayden's wife, who had vanished, investigators traced certain vehicles to a small farming hamlet called Snowtown, about 140 kilometers north of Adelaide. Inside a disused bank building on the main street, behind a 10-centimeter thick vault door, they found 6 black plastic barrels. Inside was evidence tied to 8 people. Reports described a scene so grim that even hardened investigators would never forget it. The evidence had been treated with acid. 3 days later, police searched a former residence of Bunting's in Salisbury North. Using ground-penetrating radar, the same technology developed to find plastic landmines during the Falklands War, they located 2 more sites beneath a concrete slab in the backyard. Only one of the 11 people was actually harmed in Snowtown itself. None of the people targeted and none of the perpetrators were from the town. Yet Snowtown's name became permanently attached to the case. Residents reportedly debated changing the town's name to Rosetown to escape the stigma. As of today, they're still called Snowtown. Rebranding is hard when Wikipedia exists. The trial was the longest and most expensive in South Australian legal history, lasting nearly a year. Bunting received 11 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Wagner received 10 life sentences under the same conditions. Vlasakis, who was drawn into the conspiracy at just 14 years old and later testified as a Crown witness, received a 26-year non-parole period. He became eligible for parole in 2025. Mark Hayden received 25 years with an 18-year minimum for helping conceal evidence. The film premiered at the 2011 Adelaide Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award, which feels almost ironic given how difficult it is to sit through. It then screened at the Cannes Film Festival's Critics Week, where it received a special mention. Justin Kurzel would go on to direct Macbeth starring Michael Fassbender, Assassin's Creed, and Nitram, another Australian true crime film about the Port Arthur tragedy. If you want a true crime film that feels almost too real, that refuses to give you easy answers or satisfying closure, this is one of the most accomplished films in the genre. But if you're looking for entertainment in the traditional sense, maybe skip this one and watch a documentary about dolphins instead. After Snowtown, you almost want distance, something less human, something easier to dismiss as fiction or myth or a trick of the dark. And that is exactly where the next film finds its power. Because The Fourth Kind borrowed real grief, wrapped it in fake evidence, and asked the audience to believe the lie. In 2009, this sci-fi thriller hit theaters with a bold promise. Right at the start, actress Milla Jovovich appears on screen, not in character but as herself. She tells the audience directly that the movie contains real footage, real events, real people. She says she's playing a character based on a real psychologist named Dr. Abigail Tyler, and that the film will show actual archived recordings alongside the dramatic recreations. It sounds intense, but the problem is almost none of it was true. Nome, Alaska. Population around 3,500 people. It sits on the western edge of Alaska, facing the Bering Strait. No roads connect it to the rest of the state. To get there, you need a plane or a boat. It's cold, isolated, and surrounded by some of the harshest wilderness on the planet. Now, here's what the movie got right. Nome really did have an unusual number of unsolved missing person cases over the past 40 years. Between the 1960s and 2004, around 24 people were reported missing in or around the town. For a place this small, that number caught people's attention. The people involved were usually native men from nearby villages who disappeared under unclear circumstances. Many had been spotted at bars along Front Street. Others had cashed their state dividend checks and simply were never seen again. In 2005, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, a team that specializes in complex case patterns, was called in to investigate 20 cases dating back decades. The U.S. Attorney for Alaska, the state's Department of Public Safety, and federal experts all got involved. So you've got a real town, real missing people, real federal investigation. That's the foundation the filmmakers used, but what they built on top of it was simply fiction. The Fourth Kind presents itself as a pseudo-documentary. That's a fancy way of saying the whole based on a true story thing was completely made up. The script and film are entirely fictional. There was no quiet extraterrestrial presence in Nome, Alaska. The movie follows a psychologist named Dr. Abigail Tyler, who supposedly treated patients in Nome during the year 2000. Under hypnosis, her patients start revealing strange and unsettling memories. They describe seeing an owl outside their window. Then their memories become fragmented. Some recall being taken against their will by beings they can't fully describe. The film uses a split-screen technique, showing what it claims is real footage of Dr. Tyler's sessions, alongside dramatic recreations starring Milla Jovovich. The real footage is grainy, distorted, and designed to feel like something you were never meant to watch. One scene shows a patient levitating off a bed during hypnosis. Another shows Dr. Tyler herself screaming in what appears to be a genuine breakdown. It all looks incredibly authentic, which was the whole point. To promote the film, Universal Pictures created a website with fake news stories supposedly taken from real Alaska newspapers, including the Nome Nugget and the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Nancy Maguire, editor of the Nome Nugget, had a very direct reaction when she found out. She basically said, "What the heck?" I'm paraphrasing here, but her actual words were a bit more colorful. The Alaska Press Club and the newspapers sued Universal Pictures. The studio eventually admitted to using the names without permission. Universal settled by paying $20,000 to the Alaska Press Club and donating $2,500 to a scholarship fund. They also agreed to remove all the fake articles from the internet. The mayor of Nome at the time, Denise Michaels, called the movie Hollywood hooey. She urged people to understand that this was a science fiction thriller, nothing more. Michaels compared it to the Blair Witch Project and said her office had been getting a lot of phone calls from people who thought the events were real. Those disappearances weren't a movie plot to the families affected. They were real losses, real grief, real unanswered questions. Local residents and the Alaska press didn't appreciate seeing real tragedies turned into science fiction entertainment. So if it wasn't extraterrestrial visitors taking people, what was actually happening in Nome? According to the FBI's 2005 investigation, Many of the missing persons cases were attributed to a combination of heavy drinking and exposure to the brutal, unforgiving climate. The FBI looked at 24 missing persons and suspicious cases. They found that 9 could be linked to heavy drinking. Another 9 were still being investigated by state and local authorities. Some cases weren't examined at the request of families. The investigation found no evidence to support the existence of a hidden attacker or extraterrestrial involvement. Think about the conditions: temperatures that drop way below freezing, darkness that lasts most of the day during winter months, ice that looks solid but might not be. The Bering Sea drownings theory suggests many people walked onto newly formed sea ice during low visibility and were carried away by currents when it broke free. It's not mysterious, it's tragic, and there's a huge difference. Now, here's something the movie touched on that does have some truth to it. Alaska really does have an unusually high number of missing persons. Since 1988, more than 16,000 people have disappeared within what's called the Alaska Triangle. The rate per 1,000 people is more than twice the national missing persons average. For the whole of Alaska, it works out to be an average of 2,250 people disappearing every year, twice the national average. This area, roughly connecting Anchorage, Juneau, and the northern town of Utqiagvik, contains some of the most rugged, unforgiving terrain in North America. Unlike mystical explanations, it's self-evident that the remote patches of Alaska are a very easy place to disappear within. There are more caribou than people in this state. Dense forests, hidden glaciers, sudden weather changes, and wildlife that doesn't play nice. The famous case that started all the attention happened in 1972, when a plane carrying U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs vanished between Anchorage and Juneau. For over a month, 50 civilian planes and 40 military aircraft searched 32,000 square miles. No trace of the plane, the men, or any debris was ever found. So yes, people do go missing in Alaska at alarming rates, but the explanation isn't visitors from another world. It's the world right here on Earth, specifically one of the most dangerous wilderness environments you can find. By the way, you might be wondering about the title. A close encounter of the fourth kind refers to events where a human is allegedly taken by a UFO or its occupants. The classification system was created by astronomer J. Allen Hynek, who was a scientific advisor to the U.S. Air Force on UFO studies from 1947 to 1969. You might recognize his work from another famous movie. Steven Spielberg's 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind was directly inspired by Hynek's classification system. Hynek even had a cameo in that movie. Hynek's original system only went up to the third kind. The fourth kind was added later by his colleague Jacques Vallée to cover alleged encounters where humans claim to be taken. So the movie title itself references a real scientific classification system. That is what makes the illusion so clever. It borrows a real term, places it beside real missing person cases, wraps it in fake footage, and lets the audience connect dots that were never really there. The fourth kind made about $47 million worldwide on a budget of around $10 million. So from a business perspective, the deception worked perfectly, but real families in Nome were dealing with real loss. Real journalists had their credibility exploited, and millions of viewers were tricked into believing a made-up story about made-up events. Does that make it a bad movie? That depends on what you value. As a piece of psychological horror, it's effective. As a piece of ethical filmmaking, that's a different conversation. What's undeniable is that it exposed something important about how we consume information. We want to believe, and when someone tells us convincingly that something is real, we often don't ask enough questions. And now we come to a film that makes most crime dramas feel soft by comparison: Citizen X. Released by HBO in 1995, this movie tells the story of one of the longest and most painful manhunts in modern history. It follows detectives in the Soviet Union as they try to find an unknown offender moving through the 1980s, while the system around them keeps slowing them down. But this isn't Hollywood making stuff up. The film is based upon the true story of Soviet offender Andrei Chikatilo, who was convicted in 1992 in connection with 52 women and children between 1978 and 1990. 52 confirmed. And by his own account, the number may have been even higher. The movie is based on journalist Robert Cullen's 1993 book, The Killer Department, and what makes it so haunting isn't what the film shows on screen. The filmmakers actually kept most of the worst details off camera. The film offers a solid cast and good performances, spares the audience much of the grisly details, but plays out like a docudrama. To understand what was happening in Rostov during the 1980s, you have to look past one case and into the place around it. From 1989 to 1999, 29 multiple offenders were caught there. The Moscow Times called Rostov the capital of these kinds of crimes in the world. Something was wrong there, deeply wrong. And in the middle of it all was one man who kept moving through the dark for more than a decade. The offender's first confirmed act happened in December 1978. A 25-year-old laborer named Alexander Kravchenko, who had served time before, was arrested for it. But several pieces of evidence pointed toward the real perpetrator. Traces had been found in the snow near a fence facing the house he had bought. Neighbors said he had been in that house on the evening of the incident. A witness had also given police a detailed description of a man who looked very much like him. The evidence pointed one way. The police went another. At his trial, Kravchenko took back his confession and said he was innocent. He said the confession had been forced out of him under extreme pressure. Nobody listened. Under pressure from the victim's relatives, Kravchenko was tried again, wrongly convicted, and later sent to his death by firing squad in July 1983. Now you might be asking yourself, how does someone do this for 12 years without getting caught? The answer was not just one mistake. It was denial. It was fear. It was a government that cared more about image than safety. The movie shows how Soviet propaganda and red tape helped delay the search for the offender for years. The crimes were not made public for a long time. Local leaders feared the truth would damage the image of the USSR because these offenders were seen as a decadent Western problem. Imagine telling parents their children are in danger, but your government says, nope, that's a Western problem. We don't have that here. One scene features a character saying that such offenders are a decadent Western phenomenon. And yes, that really was the official Soviet position. The investigation was codenamed Operation Forest Path. A Moscow police team, headed by Major Mikhail Fetisov, was sent to Rostov to direct the investigation. Fetisov established a team of 10 investigators based in Rostov, charged with solving all the cases. In March, Fetisov assigned a newly appointed forensic analyst, Viktor Burakov, to head the investigation. He was the best man they had for the analysis of physical evidence like fingerprints, footprints, and other manifestations at a crime scene, and he was an expert in both police science. Burakov would dedicate 8 years of his life to catching this monster. 8 years of dead ends, false leads, and bureaucratic brick walls. Then the case reached one of its worst turns. They had him. In September 1984, the suspect was nervous. Sweat gathered on his forehead. His briefcase held items that should have raised every alarm in the room. The police should have had their man right there. But then came the test results. Soviet crime labs wrongly reported that his blood type did not match what had been found in the cases. The answer came years too late. After his 1990 arrest, investigators discovered that an extremely rare biological condition had made earlier test results appear inconsistent, a 1 in a million anomaly. On paper, it looked like doubt. In reality, it became a door left open. Because of that mistake, and because his Communist Party membership protected him from deeper scrutiny, he was released. He walked out the door. And for 6 more years, the trail went cold in all the wrong places. The movie does something really important. It shows what this kind of case does to the people trying to solve it. Stephen Rea plays Viktor Burakov, and his performance earned praise for showing a human hero, not a cardboard cutout cop. The impact on the police force was enormous. One officer began hallucinating that he was the offender himself. Another spoke of extreme paranoia for more than 10 years, never knowing if he was walking past the culprit or sitting next to him on the bus. People were relentlessly and wrongly pursued. Many were mercilessly interrogated. So many lives were ruined. Nearly 200,000 people would be blood tested. Tens of thousands of ex-convicts were endlessly interrogated. The investigation became a machine that consumed everything in its path and still couldn't find the needle in the haystack. Burakov then did something unusual for Soviet law enforcement. Haunted by the victims and by the silence around them, he turned to a psychiatrist in secret. That psychiatrist created a profile of the offender that was almost too accurate. His name was Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky. In the film, Bukhanovsky is brought into the interview room. He reads from a long report he had written years earlier, laying out the mind and habits of the man he had named Citizen X. That's where the title comes from. The profile Bukhanovsky created was so accurate it was almost supernatural, and it would eventually become the key to cracking the case. By 1990, Fetisov and Burakov had spent years trying to bring the case to an end. They needed a new plan. Burakov came up with one. Most of the railroad stations, where the offender often found victims, would be covered with uniformed officers. The goal was to make those places feel unsafe for him. But 3 smaller stations would be left open, watched only by undercover agents. It was a gamble. Close the bright doors, leave a few dark ones open, then wait. The plan worked. He was arrested for a second time, and this time the evidence was much harder to ignore. But getting him to talk was another problem. For several days after November 22nd, 1990, he did not break. Then, on November 28th, Dr. Buchanovsky entered the room and read from the profile he had called Citizen X. After hearing it, Chikatilo broke down and confessed. The profile had reached something pressure could not. It showed him his own mind, line by line, until there was nowhere left to hide. So how much of the movie is real? The mistaken release and the bad test result were real parts of the investigation. Major Mikhail Fetisov was sent from Moscow, and Viktor Burakov was a civilian forensic expert assigned to lead the case. But the Central Committee, made up of Communist Party and KGB men above them, was created for the film. It was a way to show the weight of Soviet bureaucracy without stopping the story every few minutes. Some characters were combined, some parts of the system were made simpler for drama, but the heart of the story is painfully close to the truth. One reason the case took so long was that investigators spoke to more than 150,000 people while trying to narrow down the culprit. People who liked The Silence of the Lambs should watch this film. But this is not that kind of story. There is no brilliant prisoner trading riddles from behind glass. There is no clean final act where the hero outsmarts everyone. There are only years of police work, political fear, bad luck, and chances missed by inches. Citizen X premiered on February 25th, 1995, less than a year after the real sentence was carried out in February 1994. It was raw, it was close, and it felt like a case file that had only just stopped breathing. In this next case, people saw pieces of the truth everywhere. Neighbors heard things, children knew things, adults looked away. And inside one ordinary Indiana house, a teenage girl was slowly failed by almost everyone around her. Released in 2007, an American crime starring Elliot Page and Catherine Keener tells the true story of what happened to 16-year-old Sylvia Likens in Indianapolis, Indiana, back in 1965. And before you think this is just another dramatized Hollywood version of events, the script was based largely on actual court transcripts from the case. The filmmakers didn't need to exaggerate anything. The truth was already unthinkable. So what exactly happened to Sylvia Likens? In October 1965, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens passed away after being held captive for nearly 3 months. But to understand how she ended up in that situation, we need to rewind a few months. Sylvia and her younger sister Jenny were the daughters of carnival workers. Their parents, Lester and Betty Likens, traveled with fares and couldn't always bring the kids along. Sylvia's carnival worker parents boarded her and her sister Jenny with Banishevsky for $20 a week. Gertrude Banishevsky was a 37-year-old single mother of 7 children. She was struggling financially, recently divorced, and dealing with her own health problems. Although the Banishevsky family was poor, with 7 children, 3 spoons, and no stove, Lester Likens didn't look too closely into the condition of the house. 3 spoons for a house full of children should have said enough, but Lester trusted this woman with his daughters anyway. At first, things seemed okay. Sylvia even formed a friendship with Stephanie Banishevsky, often singing along to pop records together. But when one of their checks arrived late, Gertrude took out her anger on the girls. What began as punishment over money turned into something much darker. By mid-August, her anger had begun to settle almost completely on Sylvia. Some later believed jealousy played a part. Sylvia was young, polite, and full of life. In Gertrude's house, that seemed to make her a target. By the end of the summer, Sylvia was being mocked, isolated, denied food, and put through degrading situations no young person should ever face. Gertrude eventually stopped her from going to school, and Sylvia was kept inside the home. But Gertrude was not the only one involved. Some of Banishevsky's children joined in. Neighborhood kids came in and out. Some were only children themselves. They watched. Some took part. And the house on East New York Street became a place where one girl was slowly erased in front of everyone. Here's the part that makes this case even more disturbing. People in the neighborhood were aware something was wrong. Neighbors reported to police they sometimes heard her screams or someone asking for help. But in 1965, no one felt compelled to come forward. The notion being, it wasn't their business or place to intrude on someone else's household. One neighbor said the screams stopped around 3:30 a.m. on the morning of October 26, 1965. By 6:30 that afternoon, she was gone. On October 26, 1965, police were called to 3850 East New York Street. When they arrived, they found Sylvia in an upstairs bedroom. Gertrude had forced her to write a note blaming her condition on a group of boys. The room was empty. Sylvia was on a dirty mattress on the floor. Her condition showed signs of long-term neglect and prolonged mistreatment. The autopsy documented extensive evidence of what she had endured. The lead investigator later called it the worst case of cruelty he had seen in 35 years with the Indianapolis Police Department. The lead investigator later called it the worst case of cruelty he had seen in 35 years with the Indianapolis Police Department. In December 1965, a grand jury indicted Gertrude Banaszewski, her daughters Paula, 17, and Stephanie, 15, and her son John Jr., 12, and two neighbors, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, both 15, on charges of first-degree wrongdoing. The trial began in April 1966 and drew massive attention. The 5-week trial of the divorcee and 4 children, 2 of them her own, gave Indiana citizens their most searing courtroom drama in years. Counsels at the defendant's trial described the case as the most diabolical ever to be presented before a court or jury, and said Likens had been subjected to acts of degradation that you wouldn't commit on a dog. Gertrude Banaszewski pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. She was found guilty of first-degree wrongdoing and sentenced to life imprisonment. But here's the twist that makes this case even more frustrating. The judgment was reversed on appeal in 1970, and a new trial was ordered with a change of venue. The 1971 retrial again found her guilty. And then, despite everything, in 1985, she was granted parole, despite a public petition protest that raised over 40,000 signatures. She passed away in Iowa from lung cancer on June 16, 1990, aged 60. Jenny Likens had viewed Gertrude Banaszewski's obituary in a newspaper. She clipped the section and mailed it to her mother with an accompanying note reading, "Some good news. Damn old Gertrude passed away. Ha ha ha. I am happy about that. Can't say I blame her." An American Crime premiered at the 2007 Sundance Film Festival. Because of internal problems with the film's original distributor, First Look International, the film was not released theatrically. The Showtime television network officially premiered An American Crime on May 10, 2008. The film was nominated for a Golden Globe, a Primetime Emmy, both for Keena's performance, and a Writers Guild of America award. Catherine Keena's portrayal of Gertrude Banaszewski was so convincing that she originally turned down the role. However, after she could not get the story out of her head, she met with director Tommy O'Haver and agreed to do the film. Elliot Page was the only choice to play Sylvia Likens. In interviews, Keena discussed why she took on such a difficult role. She said stories about harm against children are often pushed away, hidden, or avoided. But silence does not make the problem disappear. It only gives it more room. Sylvia's case is credited with Indiana's mandated reporter law, requiring everyone in Indiana, regardless of age or profession, to report any suspicion of child mistreatment to law enforcement. In June 2001, a statue of Sylvia was built in Willard Park in Indianapolis, Indiana, and in 2016, the Boone County Child Advocacy Center was renamed Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center. The memorial itself is inscribed with a poem that reads, "I see a light, hope. I feel a breeze, strength. I hear a song, relief. Let them through, for they are the welcome ones." The house at 3850 East New York Street stood empty for years, occasional buyers seemingly never able to escape the home's haunted past. It was only in 2009 that the city of Indianapolis finally tore the home down. The story of Sylvia Likens is about a house where cruelty became public enough that people should have acted. This next story is about the opposite. A girl hidden so completely that the world kept moving above her head. Cars passed, neighbors lived their lives, seasons changed, and beneath one ordinary home in Austria, childhood was being stolen. In 2013, a German film called 3096 Days reached theaters. At first, the title feels like a number pulled from nowhere, but once you count it out, it becomes something much colder. 8 years, 6 months, and 10 days. That is how long a girl from Austria was kept in a hidden room beneath a house. A room smaller than many bathrooms. No real sky, no normal life. And somehow, from that place, she came back. To understand how it began, you have to go back to March 2nd, 1998, Vienna, Austria. 10-year-old Natasha Kampusch woke up after a bad night. She had argued with her mother over something small, the kind of fight most families forget by breakfast. But that morning, it mattered, because Natasha decided to walk to school alone. She did not want to wait. She did not want company. One small choice, made in a bad mood, opened a door no one saw. As she walked down the street, a white minivan pulled up beside her. A man jumped out. Before Natasha could even scream, he grabbed her and threw her into the back. And just like that, she was gone. Vanished in seconds. No witnesses saw it happen. Well, one 12-year-old kid thought he saw something, but his description was fuzzy. The police launched one of the biggest searches in Austrian history. They checked over 776 white minivans across the country. That's dedication. One of those vans actually belonged to the kidnapper himself, but when cops questioned him, he said he was home alone that morning, using the van to move construction rubble. The police believed him. They moved on. But he was lying. The girl was right there, underground, in his house, less than 30 minutes from where she was taken. The man behind it was Wolfgang Priklopil, a 36-year-old communications technician who worked at Siemens. On the outside, he seemed normal, quiet, kept to himself. His neighbors thought he was just a lonely guy who never had a girlfriend. But underneath that quiet exterior was a plan years in the making. Priklopil had been watching her. He saw her smile at a store once, became obsessed with it, and spent the next 10 months building a secret underground prison just for her, constructing concrete walls, installing a soundproof steel door, creating a hidden entrance behind a cupboard in his garage. The cell itself was absolutely tiny, like about 5 square meters. That's roughly 50 square feet, about the size of a small walk-in closet. No windows, no natural light, just concrete walls and a toilet. The entrance was through a crawl space so small you had to get on your hands and knees to squeeze through. Here's a fun fact that isn't fun at all. The underground room was actually built on top of an old bomb shelter that Priklopil's grandfather had constructed during the Cold War, so technically, it was designed to keep people safe during a nuclear attack. Instead, it became a prison cell for a little girl. For the first 6 months, Natasha was forbidden from leaving that tiny room. She counted the seconds to try to keep track of time, but eventually she couldn't tell if it was day or night anymore. Priklopil controlled what she ate, when she moved, and what she was allowed to know. He would show her food, then give her only small amounts. He cut her hair short so traces of her would be harder to connect to a missing child. He kept her weak. When she cried or resisted, he used fear and pain to force silence. He made her call him master. If she disobeyed, he punished her. Later, she kept a secret diary on toilet paper, recording what happened to her in that room. Some entries described attacks so severe that even the page feels too small to hold them. But Priklopil did not rely only on force. He also worked on her mind. Over time, he began letting Natasha leave the cellar for short periods. She could shower, she could clean. Later, he even took her outside into the garden. But every small freedom came with another chain. He told her the doors and windows were trapped. He told her he had a weapon. He told her that if she tried to run, she would not survive, and neither would anyone who helped her. He made himself the center of her world. He gave her books, a radio, sometimes a television. He taught her himself. He became her teacher, her guard, and her only human contact for years. She later said she felt like an Egyptian pharaoh buried alive. One time, Priklopil took her to a hardware store, in public, surrounded by people. Natasha thought about asking someone for help, but his voice was in her head. Obey me, obey me, obey me. She stayed silent. The brainwashing had worked. This went on for over 8 years. Then came August 23rd, 2006. Natasha was now 18 years old. She had grown up in captivity. That morning, Priklopil asked her to vacuum his car in the driveway. While she was cleaning, his phone rang. He stepped away to take the call because the vacuum was too loud. This was her moment. Natasha left the vacuum running and ran. She sprinted through neighboring gardens, jumped over fences, and knocked on a stranger's door. At first, people ignored her. She looked thin, pale, like a ghost. But finally, a neighbor let her in. She said 5 words that changed everything. I am Natasha Kampusch. The police came within minutes. But Priklopil was already gone. He knew it was over. He fled in his red BMW, abandoned it in a parking lot, and made his way to a train station in Vienna. That night, as police closed in, he ended his life. He was 44 years old. He never stood in court. He never had to answer the questions that were waiting for him. When news broke of Natasha's escape, Austria went into shock. People couldn't believe she was alive. They had given up hope years ago. And when she appeared on national television just 2 weeks later, she seemed calm, articulate, almost poised. Viewers were confused. How could someone who went through that be so composed? That's when the conspiracy theories started. People said she wasn't really a victim. Some said she stayed willingly. Some said she was in a relationship with Priklopil. The internet did what the internet does. It tore her apart. But here's what those people didn't understand. Natasha had been brainwashed. She had been manipulated since childhood. She didn't have normal social skills. She didn't know how victims were supposed to act. Years later, Natasha wrote a book about her experience. It was called 3096 Days, and in 2013, that book became the movie. The film stars Antonia Campbell-Hughes as the older Natasha and Thor Lindhart as Priklopil. To prepare for the role, Campbell-Hughes lost a shocking amount of weight. She said she wanted to suffer as much as Natasha did. That's commitment. The film does not soften the story. It shows the control, the hidden room, and the long, slow damage of isolation. But even then, Natasha said the real experience was worse than anything shown on screen. Things too disturbing for any audience. Today, Natasha Kampusch is 37 years old. She wrote multiple books. She hosted her own talk show in Austria for a while. She's become an advocate against cyberbullying because after her escape, she faced years of online harassment from people who didn't believe her story. Oh, and one more thing. She now owns the house where she was held captive. Natasha bought the house from Priklopil's estate. She said it was such a big part of her formative years that she didn't want it to become a museum or get torn down by vandals. She filled in the cellar with concrete herself. The place where she lost her childhood now belongs to her. That's what reclaiming your story looks like. Natasha Kampusch's story, as unbearable as it is, contains one thing many of these stories do not: escape. She came back, she spoke, she reclaimed part of what had been taken. But the next case does not give us that relief. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son. About his father is a 2008 documentary directed by Kurt Quinn. It is often named as one of the most painful true crime films ever made. But the pain does not come from mystery. It comes from knowing how many doors were left open. This story did not have to end this way. Every warning sign was there. Every failure had a name. And after Andrew Bagby was gone, the system still had time to protect his son. It did not. Andrew David Bagby was, by all accounts, the kind of person who makes you believe in humanity. Born September 25th, 1973 in Sunnyvale, California, he was the only child of David and Kathleen Bagby. From childhood, Andrew had a gift for making people feel seen and valued. His best friend, filmmaker Kurt Quenne, described him as someone who invested in others, literally and emotionally. When Quenne was making amateur films as a kid, Andrew starred in them. When those films got more serious, Andrew helped fund them with money he was saving for medical school. Because that was Andrew's other dream, becoming a doctor. Not for the prestige or the paycheck, but because he wanted to help people. He pursued his medical degree at Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada, eventually switching from surgical residency to family practice because, as he told friends, it felt like a better fit for who he was. Everyone who knew Andrew used the same words: kind, generous, warm, beloved. The kind of guy who would literally give you the scrubs off his back, which makes what happened to him even harder to stomach. Now, I need to be careful here because the internet has a tendency to armchair diagnose every murderer as a psychopath or narcissist. But in Shirley Turner's case, her own supervising physician used the term first, describing her, in hindsight, as a manipulative, guiltless psychopath. Shirley Jane Turner was born January 28, 1961, in St. Anthony, Newfoundland. By the time she met Andrew Bagby in 1999, she was nearly 13 years his senior, had been divorced twice, and had 3 children from previous relationships. Turner had a history of stalking ex-boyfriends. One former partner, also a medical resident younger than her, described how she refused to accept their breakup. She called him obsessively. When that didn't work, she showed up at his home and literally camped out for over a month, refusing to leave. She had angry outbursts, and in 1997, she was reported to have attacked a boyfriend with a high-heeled shoe. When that same former partner moved to Pennsylvania to get away from her, Turner followed him there. Then she staged a false self-harm scene. He found her in a black dress, holding roses, with 2 letters beside her, one of them written like a final note. If you're thinking, this woman has more red flags than a Chinese military parade, congratulations. You're more observant than several judges and government agencies will meet shortly. Andrew Bagby began dating Shirley Turner in early 1999 while studying at Memorial University. From the start, his friends and family were uneasy. Turner was significantly older, had been divorced twice, and her behavior struck many as off-putting. But Andrew was lonely, far from home, and Turner could be charming when she wanted to be. The relationship continued long distance after they graduated. Turner to Iowa, Andrew first to New York, and then to Pennsylvania. Turner visited Andrew 7 times. He visited her once. During this period, Turner's possessive behavior intensified. She verbally harassed him over the phone, confronted him about friendships with other women, and at one point after leaving his apartment, Turner returned, claiming she'd forgotten to lock the door. When Andrew got home, his laptop, movie collection, music collection, and various personal items were gone. No signs of forced entry. Andrew never filed charges, but come on, we all know what happened. By October 2001, the relationship was falling apart. Turner told Andrew she was 3 months pregnant, which she later admitted was a complete fabrication designed to stop him from leaving her. When Andrew discovered the lie on November 3, 2001, He ended things for good. Turner flew back to Iowa. The day after she landed, she began a 16-hour drive back to Pennsylvania, bringing a weapon with her. On November 5, 2001, Shirley Turner showed up at Andrew's residence in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. His co-workers noticed he was agitated that day. His supervising physician, Dr. T. Clark Simpson, advised him not to meet with Turner alone. Andrew didn't listen. That evening, Andrew Bagby was discovered deceased in the parking lot of Keystone State Park, having sustained multiple fatal injuries. The specific nature of his passing indicated that this was not a sudden emotional reaction, but rather a deliberate and thoroughly planned act. By the time Pennsylvania authorities issued a warrant for Turner's arrest, she had already departed the country. She left behind her car, her apartment, and all her belongings, returning to Newfoundland, Canada. And here's where the nightmare really begins. In December 2001, while in Canadian custody awaiting extradition, Shirley Turner said she was pregnant with Andrew Bagby's child. This time, she wasn't lying. The baby was conceived around October 20th, 2001, just weeks before the murder. For Andrew's parents, David and Kathleen Bagby, this news was both devastating and strangely hopeful. Their only son was gone, but a piece of him was still alive. They made an extraordinary decision. They would uproot their entire lives, move to Newfoundland, and fight for custody of their grandchild. They had no idea what they were walking into. Despite being charged with first-degree murder, despite fleeing the country, and despite warnings about her past behavior, Shirley Turner was released on $75,000 bail. Her psychiatrist, Dr. John Doucette, a former co-worker, helped post the bail money. He was later found guilty of professional misconduct and ordered to receive counseling. It is hard to look at that fact and not feel the system bending in the wrong direction. The judge who granted bail, Justice Gail Welsh, argued that Turner wasn't a danger to society because her violence was directed at one person, and that person was dead. So she was apparently no threat anymore, as if committing an offense is like chickenpox and you can only catch it once. On July 18, 2002, Zachary Andrew Turner was born. David and Kathleen Bagby applied for custody the very next day. The Canadian justice system seemed more interested in protecting the rights of an accused murderer than the safety of an infant child. Turner initially refused to let the Bagbys see their grandson, fearing they would kidnap him. Social workers noted that Zachary had poor attachment to his mother and preferred the company of his grandparents, and yet custody remained with Turner. In November 2002, Turner was finally remanded into custody pending extradition, but in January 2003, Judge Gail Welsh, yes, the same judge, released her on bail again. The Bagbys had to hand Zachary back to a woman charged with murdering his father. On August 18, 2003, exactly 1 month after Zachary's first birthday, Shirley Turner did the unthinkable. She took both her own life and Zachary's, walking into the waters of Conception Bay South with her son. Neither survived. Before that final act, Turner had staged evidence at the scene, attempting to pin the blame on her most recent boyfriend. Even in her last moments, she was still manipulating the people around her. A 2006 inquiry by the Newfoundland Ministry of Justice found that Zachary's death was entirely preventable. The report concluded that judges, prosecutors, and child welfare agencies were more concerned with presuming Turner's innocence than protecting a child. The supervising physician who had warned about Turner's psychopathic tendencies years earlier had submitted statements to the court. There were 8 restraining orders against Turner on file. None of it mattered. Kurt Quenney had been filming throughout this entire nightmare. What began as a memorial for his best friend became something far more devastating and ultimately far more important. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father premiered at the Slamdance Film Festival in January 2008. MSNBC acquired the film and broadcast it that December. The National Board of Review named it one of the top 5 documentaries of 2008. After watching Dear Zachary in March 2009, Canadian MP Scott Andrews was so moved that he introduced Bill C-464, Zachary's Bill, to Parliament. The bill amended Canada's criminal code to give courts the power to refuse bail to someone charged with a serious crime who poses a potential danger to children under 18. On December 16, 2010, Zachary's Bill became law. Kurt Quenney has stated that all profits from the documentary go to scholarships established in Andrew and Zachary's names. After Dear Zachary, it is hard not to feel rage at a system that had the chance to protect a child and failed. But what happens when failure is not a mistake? What happens when the people responsible are not hidden, not ashamed, not even afraid? In Indonesia, the men behind a national nightmare did not disappear into history. They became part of the public record, smiling for the camera. The Act of Killing is a film so deeply unsettling that even Werner Herzog, a man who's eaten his own shoe on camera and willingly worked with Klaus Kinski, called it unprecedented in the history of cinema. So what happens when the people behind mass atrocities do not hide from what they did? What happens when they are treated like national heroes, invited into politics, protected by power, and allowed to speak openly about the darkest chapters of their past on television? And what happens when a filmmaker hands them a camera and says, "Show me how you remember it in any movie genre you want"? That's not a hypothetical. That's Indonesia. And this is the story of Anwar Congo, a man who openly claimed responsibility for more than 1,000 lives lost, then agreed to restage those events on film, complete with costumes, movie references, and musical numbers. To understand how a documentary this surreal could exist, we need to go back to 1965. Indonesia was a Cold War battleground. President Sukarno led a nationalist government with strong ties to the Indonesian Communist Party, known as the PKY, at the time the largest communist party outside of China and the Soviet Union, with roughly 3 million members. On September 30th, 1965, a group of military officers abducted 6 Indonesian army generals. The circumstances remain disputed to this day, but the Indonesian military, led by General Suharto, blamed the PKI. What followed was one of the 20th century's largest and least discussed campaigns of political persecution. Between October 1965 and mid-1966, Indonesian military forces and civilian groups targeted anyone suspected of communist sympathies. The number of lives lost is still debated. The Indonesian army itself estimated 1 million. Some scholars place the number between 500,000 and 1.5 million. Others suggest up to 3 million, when including those who did not survive detention camps. And the targets were not only PKI members, ethnic Chinese Indonesians, intellectuals, union workers, teachers, artists. Anyone who could be labeled a communist was suddenly in danger. In some regions, entire villages disappeared from ordinary life. Rivers became places people were afraid to look at. Families learned not to ask questions out loud. Silence became a survival skill, and the perpetrators won. Suharto seized power and ruled Indonesia as a dictator for 31 years. The men involved were never prosecuted. Many became wealthy businessmen and politicians. The paramilitary organization behind much of the violence, Pemuda Pancasila, still exists today with millions of members. Imagine if the darkest figures of World War II had won, rewritten the history books, and were still holding rallies in the streets. That's essentially modern Indonesia. In 2005, American filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer arrived in Medan, North Sumatra, to make a documentary about plantation workers. He quickly discovered that the workers were terrified to speak on camera because the men who had destroyed their families during the 1965 purges still lived nearby and still held power. When Oppenheimer started interviewing the perpetrators instead, he encountered something he didn't expect. They were thrilled to talk, not just willing, but eager, boastful even. One man stood out. Anwar Congo, a former movie theater gangster who had been recruited by the military to lead a group called the Frog Squad, Pasukan Kodok. By his own admission, Anwar personally wiped out at least 1,000 people, though some estimates place the number higher. He described his methods with a casualness that feels almost impossible to process. After interviewing over 40 perpetrators who were disturbingly casual about their crimes, Oppenheimer made an unusual proposal. He would let them recreate their memories on film, in whatever cinematic genre they wanted. Gangster movie? Sure. Western? Absolutely. Musical number with backup dancers emerging from a giant fish statue? Why not? The perpetrators jumped at the chance. These were men who had grown up obsessed with Hollywood. They'd scalped movie tickets outside theaters, idolizing James Dean and John Wayne. They explicitly modeled their methods after what they'd seen on screen. So Anwar and his associates, including Herman Koto, a flamboyant paramilitary figure who appears in elaborate costumes, began writing scripts, designing scenes, and staging reenactments of their past. They played both perpetrators and victims. They hired local villagers as extras. Some of those villagers came from families who had suffered during the actual events. Here's where the story gets even darker. The United States knew, and supported it. In 2017, the National Security Archive released 39 declassified documents from the US Embassy in Jakarta, part of a cache of nearly 30,000 pages covering 1964 to 1968. The documents revealed that American diplomats had detailed real-time knowledge of this and cheered them on. One embassy cable from December 1965 described it as a fantastic switch. American officials provided the Indonesian military with lists of PKI leaders to target. A political officer named Robert J. Martins gave Indonesian forces a list of roughly 5,000 names. The army returned those lists with the names of the people removed, checked off. The Cold War logic was brutally simple. Indonesia was a domino. Washington did not want falling toward communism. If stopping that meant looking away from mass suffering or helping the machinery move faster, then officials were willing to do it. The full scope of CIA involvement remains partly hidden behind classified walls. In 2014, Oppenheimer released a companion film called The Look of Silence. Where the act of killing focused on the perpetrators, this film follows Adi Rukun, an optometrist whose older brother was taken during the purges before Adi was even born. With eye-testing equipment and footage Oppenheimer had gathered, Adi confronts the men connected to his brother's fate. He fits them with glasses while asking them to account for what happened. The metaphor is not subtle, but it does not need to be. He is trying to help them see clearly, literally, and morally. For Adi, even asking those questions carried risk. He had to use a pseudonym and hide his location. His family still lives among the men who shaped their grief. The danger was not theoretical, it was down the road. Anwar Congo passed away on October 25, 2019, at age 78. He was never prosecuted. No one was. The act of killing won the BAFTA for Best Documentary, was nominated for an Academy Award, and appeared on countless Best of the Decade lists. In June 2025, the New York Times ranked it number 82 on their list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century. Indonesia has never officially acknowledged the massacres as crimes against humanity. Indonesia has never fully reckoned with the 1965 to 1966 atrocities as crimes against humanity. The Indonesian Human Rights Commission, Komnas HAM, published a report in 2012 documenting the abuses, but the government did not meaningfully act on it. Survivors and their descendants still face discrimination. The act of killing shows what happens when power protects the guilty. But in our final case, the guilty man did not just walk free for a time. He helped send an innocent man to his final fate, and by the time the truth came out, Britain had to face a question no justice system ever wants to answer. What if the state cannot undo what it has done? In one of the most staggering failures of justice in modern British history, a quiet, soft-spoken offender named John Christie hid the truth inside the walls and garden of 10 Rillington Place, then watched from the witness box as another man was condemned for what he had done. This is the case that changed British law forever. And if you are wondering how a film about a crime from the 1940s could still matter today, consider this. The case played a major role in ending the use of capital punishment in the United Kingdom. They made a mistake so terrible that an entire country had to look at its justice system and ask whether it could ever be trusted with someone's life again. John Reginald Halliday Christie was born in 1899 in Yorkshire, England. From early on, there were signs that something in him did not sit right. He struggled socially, carried deep insecurity, and later developed troubling issues around intimacy and control. When he was 8 years old, Christie saw his grandfather laid out in a casket, an experience he later described as life-changing. Whether that moment explains anything is impossible to say, but Christie himself seemed to treat it like a door opening somewhere dark. Christie served in World War I, where a mustard gas attack damaged his vocal cords. For the rest of his life, he spoke barely above a whisper. By his late 20s, Christie had been in prison for theft and assault, including violent behavior against a woman. But during World War II, he somehow got a job as a special police constable. In 1938, Christie and his wife Ethel moved into the ground floor flat at 10 Rillington Place, a cramped terrace house in Notting Hill, London. For most residents, it was just another dingy address in post-war Britain. For Christie, it became something else entirely. Christie's first admitted victim was Ruth Fürst, a 21-year-old Austrian munitions worker. In August 1943, while his wife was visiting relatives, Christie invited Fürst to his home. She did not leave alive. He later hid her remains in the back garden. What followed was not panic, not remorse, not horror at what he had done. According to Christie, it gave him a sense of power, and once a man like that discovers power in the worst possible place, the dark only gets deeper. His second known victim was Muriel Eady, a 32-year-old colleague from the radio factory where Christie worked. He invited her over, claiming he could help treat a recurring chest problem with a special inhaler. In reality, the setup was a trap involving household gas. Once she was helpless, Christie assaulted her and took her life, then hid her in the garden beside Fürst. 2 women were now buried behind the house while ordinary London life went on around them. Later, Christie's dog reportedly uncovered part of what had been hidden. Christie disposed of it in a bomb-damaged building nearby. Even then, the warning did not reach the people who needed to hear it. In 1948, a young Welsh truck driver named Timothy Evans and his pregnant wife Beryl moved into the upstairs flat at 10 Rillington Place. They had a baby daughter named Geraldine. By then, Timothy and Beryl's marriage was strained, and the pressure of money, parenting, and cramped living made everything worse. When Beryl became pregnant again in 1949, the couple was already struggling financially and felt they couldn't manage another child. Options were extremely limited in Britain at the time, and Beryl found herself in a desperate situation looking for help. That was when their downstairs neighbor, the soft-spoken Mr. Christie, made his offer. Christie knew Timothy, a lapsed Catholic, would likely object, so Beryl approached him discreetly. That decision would become one of the most tragic turns in the entire case. Christie told the Evans couple he had medical knowledge and could help them with their situation. Timothy Evans, a man described as having limited education and easily influenced by others, agreed to trust this whispering neighbor with his wife's well-being. On November 8, 1949, Beryl Evans, only 20 years old, and baby Geraldine, just 15 months old, were both found to have lost their lives at 10 Rillington Place. Their bodies were hidden in the wash house at the back of the property. What happened next is almost impossible to accept, even now. Christie convinced Timothy Evans that Beryl had passed away during the illegal procedure, and that Evans needed to leave London to avoid suspicion. Evans was panicked. He was confused. Eventually, he went to police in Wales and gave statements that shifted and contradicted themselves because he had been manipulated, terrified, and pushed into a nightmare he did not know how to explain. Police did not believe Evans when he retracted his confessions, claiming that Christie done it. Evans's trial began at the Old Bailey on January 11, 1950. He was charged only in relation to the passing of his daughter Geraldine, not Beryl, and the star witness for the prosecution was his neighbor, John Christie. The actual culprit took the stand and testified against an innocent man. Christie, with his whispering voice and respectable demeanor, was utterly convincing. Evans, barely literate and clearly distressed, looked guilty by comparison. The jury deliberated Timothy's fate for 35 minutes before finding him guilty. That's less time than most people spend deciding what to watch on Netflix. On March 9, 1950, still maintaining his innocence, Timothy Evans faced the final penalty at Pentonville Prison. He was 25 years old. After Evans was gone, the Christies continued living at 10 Rillington Place, but Christie was unraveling. In December 1952, Ethel Christie suddenly disappeared. Her husband had taken her life in their home and hidden her beneath the living room floorboards. He told her family she was unwell. He forged her signature to access her bank account. He collected benefits in her name. Even after everything, he still found ways to turn the dead into something useful to him. By March 1953, Christie had claimed 3 more victims: Rita Nelson, Kathleen Maloney, and Hectorina McLennan. His final crimes followed a familiar pattern of deception, control, and concealment. He used the gas supply in the kitchen to incapacitate the women, then hid their remains in a concealed alcove behind the kitchen wall. Afterward, he wallpapered over the entrance and carried on with his life, until the smell became unbearable. In March 1953, Christie moved out of the flat. New tenants arrived, and during work in the kitchen, one of them discovered the concealed space. Behind the wall were the remains of 3 women. A full search of the property revealed more hidden evidence across the house and garden. The secret of 10 Rillington Place had finally broken through the walls. A search for Christie began, and 10 days later he was found on the riverbank in Putney, disheveled and defeated. He confessed almost immediately. Christie's trial at the Old Bailey began on June 22, 1953. His defense attempted to argue insanity, but the prosecution pointed to the concealment, the planning, and the way he covered his tracks. These were not the actions of a man unaware of what he had done. The jury convicted him in just over an hour. On July 15, 1953, John Christie faced the same final punishment at Pentonville Prison, the very same place where Timothy Evans had been put to death 3 years earlier. Same prison, same system, probably the same official carrying it out. Director Richard Fleischer brought this nightmare to the screen in 1971 with a film that is deliberately drab, suffocating, and deeply unsettling. The film dramatizes the crimes of John Christie and the injustice involving Timothy Evans. It was adapted by Clive Exton from Ludovic Kennedy's 1961 nonfiction book, 10 Rillington Place. Most of the location filming happened in a flat near the actual site, but Richard Attenborough did film one scene inside 10 Rillington Place itself. The building was demolished shortly after the film was completed. The Evans case didn't just haunt the public consciousness, it changed the law. Along with the cases of Derek Bentley and Ruth Ellis, it played a major role in restricting capital punishment in 1957, introducing diminished responsibility into English law, and eventually ending the use of capital punishment for murder in Great Britain. In 1965, Parliament passed the Murder Act, formally abolishing the death penalty for murder in Great Britain. In October 1966, Timothy Evans was granted a posthumous pardon. 16 years after his life had already been taken by the state. In 2003, the Home Office awarded Evans's half-sister compensation for the injustice. The independent assessor accepted that Evans's conviction and execution were wrongful and that there was no evidence to implicate him in the passing of his wife. It only took 54 years for the system to officially admit what should have been obvious from the beginning. They condemned the wrong man. And by the time they said it out loud, the grave had already been full for half a century.
And there it is. We have reached the bottom of the disturbing movie Iceberg. Down here, cinema stops being simple entertainment and becomes something closer to evidence. Evidence of what societies fear. Evidence of what audiences will tolerate. Evidence of what filmmakers are willing to show when nobody is around to tell them, maybe take it down a notch, you lunatic. Some of these films were inspired by real crimes. Others were banned, censored, buried, or quietly passed between viewers who apparently considered a full night of sleep an unnecessary luxury. But disturbing cinema is not defined only by blood, violence, or shock. The films that stay with us are usually the ones that crawl under the surface. They force us to look at cruelty without the comfortable distance of a headline. They turn real suffering into images, performances, and stories that cannot always be forgotten when the screen goes black. And that creates an uncomfortable question. When does a film expose evil? When does it exploit it? And when are we, the audience, pretending we are studying human nature when we are really just staring into the darkness to see what moves? There is no clean answer. Some films discussed tonight are serious works of art. Some are crude acts of provocation. Some are warnings. And some feel like they were created because somebody had a camera, absolutely no supervision, and a deeply suspicious relationship with good judgment. But every title on this iceberg tells us something about the time, culture, crime, fear, or obsession that produced it. That is why we watch. Not to glorify violence. Not to romanticize killers. And certainly not to compete over who can sit through the most disturbing movie without blinking. There is no trophy. There is only insomnia. Before you crawl back toward the surface, take a second to subscribe to Bambi Palermo and the Pizzaverse. Here we dig into true crime, banned films, hidden history, organized crime, strange legends, psychology, old Hollywood, dark fairy tales, and the stories powerful people would prefer you never examine too closely. So hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the Pizzaverse before the algorithm buries us somewhere beneath dance challenges, fake outrage, and a 12-hour live stream of somebody arguing with their own comment section. And to the real ones who watch, comment, share the videos, and keep showing up, thank you. Every view helps, every comment matters, every share drags another curious soul into our beautifully suspicious little corner of the internet. Your loyalty, support, and sense of humor keep this operation moving. Thank you for watching. Thank you for questioning. And thank you for being part of our empire. Stay sharp. Stay skeptical. Stay authentic. This is the Pizzaverse. And we don't rewrite history. We excavate it.